Good afternoon, good morning, folks. This is Doug Cluck. I'm not sure if hey, what do you see on your screen, Dennis, right now? Do you see my presentation or not? In non-presentation form?
I do not.
You do not. All right. Huh. Wonder how I do that. Oh, how about this? Now what do you see?
The preview version of your slides.
Thank you so much. I'm going to blow it up here.
If people couldn't tell, we're flying by the seat of our pants a little bit today getting this done.
Well, that's because we usually don't. We're not usually the presenters. I'm usually the person in the background making it all, sort of organizing it. So, welcome to our webinar again. Normally we do this every month on the third Thursday of each month after the Climate Prediction Center puts out its latest seasonal outlooks and all that business. Dennis and I and others have been talking about doing an extra webinar due to the conditions across the north central part of the U.S., mainly from a drought and heat perspective, and giving an update sort of in the middle of the between webinars. So obviously the first of the month. We also have a few new pieces of information to provide from the Climate Prediction Center in terms of outlooks, and of course, as you'll see, plenty of summary information in just a few minutes. This is a bit of an abbreviated version. We're not going to go through as much detail and state by state breakdown that we would normally do on a monthly call, but that'll happen. Again, I'll give you a webinar URL to sign up if you haven't already signed up for that, but that will take place on July 15th. And Pete Boulay from the Climate Office in Minnesota will be the person doing that presentation. So we'll be back on the 15th.
And also some of our usual products are not available because of the timing of this too, like the NCI monthly summaries.
That's true. There's nothing to update there. However, we are going to show some climate summary information, and I'll get into that. If I haven't said my name, it's Doug Cluck, and my partner today is Dennis Toddy. I represent NOAA and the National Centers for Environmental Information, based in Kansas City, Missouri. Dennis is with the USDA in the Midwest Climate Hub up in Ames, Iowa. So I'm going to be talking more or less about the climate summary and outlook. He's going to be focusing more on sort of the impact and considerations for agriculture due to the climate issues that we're having. So why don't we go ahead and get started, and let's go on here. So I'm going to start by looking back over the last 90 days in terms of temperature and precipitation. These maps, the one on the left is a temperature map in terms of departure from normal temperatures. And where you see sort of yellow to orange colors across the northern part of the map, there are all temperatures that have been above normal when you average it all out over this period. Cooler temperatures as you sort of hit the Iowa-Nebraska border and south, and obviously you can see those kind of greens and green to blue colors. So temperatures have been a little bit cooler than normal down there, and definitely above normal to the north. When we look at precipitation, as often happens, by the way, through basically the spring into early summer, you see precipitation values being well below, or percentages well below normal. The red indicating 50% or less of their normal precipitation. And this is a critical time, as Dennis is going to tell you, for agriculture, and especially rangeland and such out west. And then some places definitely had above normal precipitation down to the south, across Missouri and Illinois, stretching into all the way, well, from Colorado all the way to Michigan. So that's the last 90 days outlook. And then looking more recently, last 30 days or so, we see that departure from normal temperature trend continue in terms of being warmer than normal. And golly, those are a lot warmer than normal. And this is the end of May through basically the end of June, and you see temperatures 6 to 8 in a few places 10 degrees above normal for an extended period, and that's not good in any case. And then on the right map shows the percent of normal precipitation for that same period. And those red colors, again, are the worst. So you're talking less than 50, in some cases less than 25%. And I think in a few places, if you look very closely, less than 5% of normal precipitation in places mainly to the west, but golly, really across Minnesota, the Dakotas, parts of Nebraska, Wyoming, and Montana are really under the gun. Some above normal precipitation, and we're going to get into a little bit about that a little later, because there are some ramifications of that above normal precipitation, or have been lately, in Missouri anyway. So one other thing I wanted to show you on this slide is just looking at maximum temperatures. The last one took into account average temperatures over the entire day. This really takes into account only the average maximum temperatures for that same period of May 31st to June 29th. You can see the breadth of above normal maximum temperature. Okay, they're really centered in Montana and portions of the Dakotas, just super hot. Yeah, it's probably not as hot as it was, strictly speaking, in Seattle and in Portland, but what I would say is it's record breaking, especially the first 14 days. If you add them up, they've never seen a stretch that early. This is really early June. This is more common, but not very common later in the summer, like July and early August. That's when you would see those 100-degree temperatures more likely. This was pretty unheard of, having it happen that early in the year. Percent of normal precipitation on the right. Again, I guess I just talked about this, so I guess I'll move on. So last 7 days, this is what I wanted to get to in terms of how much it has rained, sort of in the south central part of the North Central region, if you will. So eastern Kansas, Missouri, really, and then Illinois, parts of Indiana, and up to Michigan. It's hard to see exactly what the values are here, but this is our sort of radar-derived information for the most part. So we're looking at over 10 inches in places in Missouri, and some radar reports of over 15. And because of that, there is some flooding down here. Now, it's also important over the last 7 days to look at the rest of the area. I'm not saying that if you got an inch of rain, it's inconsequential, because it is consequential, but there are certainly a lot of areas there that are well less than an inch of rain over the last 7 days, so things drying out in some places. So if you've been wet, you're lucky, and hopefully you haven't been too wet, but those are pretty small areas compared to the areas that are not getting a lot of precipitation. So just getting back to the too much precipitation in localized areas, yep, there are some sites across Missouri and Illinois, and I guess Kansas and Indiana and Michigan that have some minor flooding. There was some major flooding for a day or two over the last week in portions of Missouri. Most of those smaller rivers. I think one record was set. But if you get 10 to 15 inches of rain, what do you expect during that period? So some flooding, but again, not the biggest story, I guess, lately. There's Streamflow. There's a Streamflow image from yesterday, where you see a blue color. Those are the above normal stream flows for this time of year, and where you see green, that's relatively normal for this time of year, and the browns, tans, or reds are below normal. So as you move sort of north and definitely west, those numbers or those colors tend to be more orange and red, so below normal stream flow for that time of year. I'm going to shift to outlooks now. Just a couple of pictures from that Laura Edwards, the state climatologist from South Dakota sent me from folks that she knows out there looking at some of the rangeland. The image on the right is really a stock pond that has, as you can see, gone down quite a bit lately. So there's some issues there with watering livestock and such. All right, so the first one we usually start with in terms of outlooks is what's going to happen in terms of precipitation over the next 7 days. So from today through the 8th of July, we're not predicting any major precipitation events across most of the north central part of the U.S. And in fact, places like in Missouri and Kansas, where it was so wet, it looks like it's going to dry out quite a bit. There are hints of some precipitation events happening across southern the Dakotas, especially South Dakota and Minnesota into Iowa. But again, these are not heavy events, and they will hopefully suffice to keep things going. There is some indication that the Front Range of the Rockies will continue to have some wetness as well as we move on this week. I'm trying not to be a Debbie Downer about the rest of the outlooks, but I don't know what else to say other than tell you what the forecast is. So the image on the left is for the week 2. That's July 8th through the 14th. At July 8th to the 14th, the week after the next, actually, looking at temperatures on the left, and those are probabilities in there. So we're seeing a 70% probability, which is very high, for above normal temperatures and probably excessive heat. So 10, 15 degrees above what normally would be there. In some cases, 20, perhaps even a few records broken. Across areas that really don't need it. So the Dakotas all the way west, I guess you'd say. And then unfortunately, what usually goes along with that, especially in the summer, and you can look at the map on the right, the precipitation map, is drier than normal conditions. So there's a greater than normal chance of being below normal in terms of precipitation as well. There are some hints of some wetness, some precipitation to the east, if you will. The Mississippi, sort of mid-Mississippi and Ohio basins staying wet, I guess you could say. So that's what the forecast is. There's going to be a cutoff line, and I don't know exactly. We don't know. It's not obvious where that cutoff line is going to be between sort of wetter conditions and drier conditions. But this is the best guess as of today. So being more or less from the Great Lakes, sort of southwest into the plains. Just quickly, in terms of, we did mention excessive heat at the beginning, and so over the next 3 to 7 days, this is a 3 to 7 day hazard outlook actually. It's a little hard to see, so I apologize for that. But if you look up in the Dakotas, Montana, there is a pretty good chance on the 3rd and 4th of July for excessive heat. Also further west, you see that too. And then there's a much above normal temperature sort of surrounding that in red, if you will. So just that's the reason I put that on here was to highlight some of that heat building back, as we say, into the northern plains and the northwest, if you will. Here's the week 2 hazardous temperature outlook. Pretty much the same areas I just showed you, but expanded a bit down into the south, more or less into the south and southwest, but also a little bit east into the Dakotas and northern high plains. So let's see, week 2 shows heat, and the probabilities were high there too. There is a slight chance of above normal or heavy precipitation, I should say, from Missouri all the way to through Kentucky, so, and sort of north and south of that line. So there is a slight chance of heavy precipitation there in terms of hazards and such. This is the old July July temperature and precipitation outlook. So I'm going to show, what I'm going to do here is, when I say old, it means from 2 weeks ago. And I'm going to show you the updated one on top of these. So there's the old one. Here's the new one. I can go back. Not really that much difference. A little bit of below normal temperature sort of introduced into the southeast, and strengthening, if you will, strengthening that probability of heat in the northwest, sort of edging into the northern plains for July. And then in terms of precipitation, whoops, going the wrong way. In terms of precipitation, again, strengthening that below normal category and sort of expanding the above normal probabilities in the south and southwest, where the monsoon may kick up a little bit, they hope desperately. So that's the outlook. These are the current, right here, are the current outlooks for temperature on the left, precipitation on the right. It's not great for the northern plains in terms of temperature and precipitation. Looking at July, August, and September as a whole, this is what we presented actually a couple of weeks ago on our regular webinar, is for temperature on the left, above normal probabilities of above normal temperature across the west, northern tier, and kind of a area of equal chances from Missouri south. So not necessarily cool, but not necessarily above normal either across that area. And then in terms of precipitation, again, we're not seeing a huge change in pattern here, but below normal for the west, northwest, western part of the country. And then I threw in a couple more. Here's August, September, and October outlooks. And again, we're seeing above on the left, temperature probabilities being above normal, and then on the right, probabilities of precipitation being below normal to the west and slightly enhanced to our east. In terms of drought, and I kind of stretched this out a little bit, but anyway, here is where this is updated as of this morning. These are the drought categories that we're currently in. Some extreme drought, exceptional drought actually, in portions of western Colorado still, and up through Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota, and Wyoming. I expect those values, those colors to increase over time based on all those outlooks I just provided. So I don't see any way around that at the moment. And then here is a change in the last 12 weeks where we've seen, if you will, drought grow and where it kind of diminished. So the green is where drought has diminished quite a bit over the last 12 weeks, last 3 months, more or less, and where drought has become more and more of an issue, where it's yellow and sort of orange. The gray areas have pretty much stayed the same through the whole period. So yeah, you can see there where, especially in the Midwest and plain states, where drought has increased. A few places where it's decreased here and there. And then as you go south, obviously a big decrease across Texas and the Front Range of Colorado.
Doug, can I chime in real quickly on this?
Please do.
Yeah, because the eastern part of the Corn Belt, kind of on the southern Great Lakes, you have an interesting contrast there with improvement from Illinois over to Ohio, but worsening to the north and a little bit to the south of it. So really interesting contrasts around where we've had precipitation and not had precipitation, and some pretty sharp boundaries between those this year. Yeah, very sharp boundaries. And then here's the seasonal outlook. This also hasn't changed. This came out on June 17th. More or less filling in those areas, those yellow places where it's yellow, or filling in the areas where drought hasn't, been at a certain level as of yet. So really, and the brown is persistence, not really changing much at all. And this is through the end of September. Okay, so the wildland fire outlook, all I have to say really about this is, this is from last month. This is changing today. And according to sources, there's going to be more red on these, not surprisingly. And now remember, these
maps really show where the wildland fire potential, the red part, is above normal. It's normal to have wildfire, of course, in the West in the summer. Okay, so this is really trying to accentuate where it's going to be above normal, where conditions are going to be worse than they normally are in the West, if you will. And already, you can look in August, and this is from last month, they already knew that conditions out into the plains were going to be worse. Go ahead, Dennis. Did you have something to say about that?
Nope.
Oh, okay. And then I put the URL to go get those outlooks right there. I know it's going to be quick. I'm going to take an extra second here for you if you want to write that down or whatever. But you can also just type in fire predictive services or National Interagency Fire Center. You can find these maps when they come out at 1 o'clock or so Central Time. I believe that's about when they come out. So those will be updated. A lot of key points here. I won't go into great detail. There's not really much to say other than, you know, we sometimes talk about El Nino and La Nina. It's not a major player right now in terms of our weather, and often it isn't in the summer. It's more so in the winter, in the cooler seasons. Current conditions are generally dry, except in some places like my backyard in Kansas City. Generally dry to extreme dryness since last year, and some of that has been since last year. This has been a very slow developing drought. Some can date it back until last spring. The super hot temperatures aren't helping much, and yes, you could call some places flash drought, but for the most part, this has been an evolving process that we've been talking about since last year. The outlook, I know, what can I say? Where it's hot and where it's dry, it's going to stay hot and dry. Basically, that's what we're saying through the end of the summer. Lots of concerns. You know, last year we had a lot of wildfire and a lot of smoke. Well, it would be very surprising if that did not happen again this year. Water quantity, in some cases, for people and animals and ecosystems. Water quality are going to be issues. Long-lasting, near to record heat is going to be something to deal with as well. Dennis is going to talk about impacts to agriculture. There's there's recreation issues. There's health, and if you don't know about our regularly scheduled, if you will, webinar, there's the information to get onto that. I think that's it. Other than to say, these will be recorded. This is being recorded, and we'll be putting them on those sites right there. We can probably copy that off and put it in the chat section here for you if you want that. And then here are some of the other places you may want to go to get more information. National Drought Mitigation Center, drought.gov, and there's the CPC. We mentioned CPC, which is the Climate Prediction Center. You can always go there and get updates as well. One thing I didn't mention at the beginning of all of this is that you can put questions in the question box, and we'll get to those at the end of our presentations. Now I'm gonna hang this up. Let's see, how do I do that, Dennis? There we go, and I'm going to change to you. There we go. And while you're bringing yours up, I'll say a couple words about the summer forecasts. Generally speaking, it is tough. Summer is a tough time to forecast because we always get a lot of questions about how long is this going to last and when is the drought going to break and all that kind of stuff. And those are very hard questions, especially in the summer, to answer because sometimes the models aren't the strongest during that period. We don't have major pushes of cold air or warm air north and south. We're sort of in a stasis, if you will. So, a question I've been asking is, well, are we locked into this pattern for a long period of time, or is it going to change, or how long should we wait, and all that business? And, summertime, like I said, jet stream goes to the north. There's not a lot of flow, if you will, in the atmosphere from east to west to east, I should say. And so we get these sort of persisting patterns. And where you develop, sometimes when you develop a lot of heat and a lot of dryness, it persists. And Dennis, go ahead if you have any more that you want to say about that.
Okay, first, are you seeing my screen, Doug?
Yeah, looks good.
Yeah. Okay. All right. I didn't have any special comments on that. Do you want to finish out with that, or do you want me to go ahead and take off here?
Take it away, Dennis.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Doug. Thanks for setting up here. Basically, I'm going to be kind of the impact section of this in a form of mostly agricultural. We'll throw a couple other things in related to this. Brian Fuchs brought up the comment, so I was able to quickly add this to go along with the outlooks, which Doug just talked about, the monthly drought outlook, which was just updated late yesterday afternoon, shows that area of expected drought and potential drought development. The brown area is drought is expected to persist. Yellow areas are ones that are expected to development is likely. So the Central Plains, possibly the area up around northern Minnesota, Wisconsin returning, while there is some recovery that is likely to occur in the eastern Great Lakes states as we're going along here. Okay. All right, jumping into kind of follow-up pattern here. A couple different maps of soil moisture. Again, soil moisture models, a couple different versions of models to give you an idea. And all models do things a little bit differently, so you're looking for consistency, and there's actually pretty good consistency in this. No surprise, that area from northern Iowa up into Minnesota and the Dakotas has the driest situation going on right now with soils that are from a percentile basis, top 10, top 5, even top 2 driest. A little bit of dryness over in Ohio and the far eastern Corn Belt, depending on which model you're looking at there, as the heat has kind of dried things out a little bit. But the most serious places right now are that area, northern Iowa and northward, that we're most concerned about. And then obviously dry throughout much of the West. A new product we've not shown before, just to touch on briefly, reiterating the difficulties in the vegetation issues. This is a vegetation health index. It's shown on drought.gov, but the data comes from NOAA STAR. It's basically a remotely sensed product that senses what is being emitted by the surface of the earth. Surfaces that are dry, surfaces that have drier vegetation show up brighter because there's more infrared being emitted. So basically the areas that are redder here, redder, pinker, are the worst areas, and areas that are in the greens to blues are better. So it kind of continues to show overall mixed conditions in that Iowa area, Iowa, Wisconsin, partially Minnesota, northern plains poor, further out in the plains poor, eastern Corn Belt generally not too bad overall. Just a couple other pieces of information we've picked up. Pete Boulay from the Minnesota Climate Office, they do the take pan evaporation measurements, basically an open pan, how much water evaporates. It's an idea of how dry the atmosphere is, how much and impact of solar radiation, wind all play into that. Their June pan evaporation total was the highest June since 1988. Some of you remember 1988 as being one of the major drought years we've had in the last 50 years. We didn't have the NCEI monthly summary maps, but some preliminary data. The northern area, parts of the northern area are likely top 5 to 10 warmest. Also, probably top 5 driest in parts of South Dakota, Minnesota, Iowa. Again, these are not official, they're preliminary, but to give you some perspective. And actually top 5 to 10 wettest in that wet area that Doug talked about from Missouri over to Michigan. Okay, just a rehash of where we are on the drought monitor, reiterating those areas and part of the issues where we're most concerned about, where we haven't had precipitation and we've had those warm temperatures, and where we have had precipitation in the southern part of the Corn Belt and how that's impacting the U.S. drought monitor. Doug talked about fires. Here's the large incident fire as reported by the, I don't know who reports this. Doug, chime in if you remember who this is, or other folks, please remind me. Current large fires are in Colorado, western Colorado, and then border of Montana, Wyoming in our region. But, again, as we've talked about, the potential for this is likely to increase as the dryness continues.
Yeah, Dennis, that's the National Interagency Fire Center.
Thank you, Doug. I appreciate that. Yep. Okay, the one, I won't say positive, but one thing that has worked in the favor, we did have a mixture of cool and wet, or cool and warm early in the season, early in the growing season. This is a growing degree day plot that anyone can go to their region in the Corn Belt and enter their planting date to say where they are in the way of growing degree days. I just picked Redwood County, Minnesota, kind of in southwestern Minnesota. The purple line in the middle is the average accumulation from April 30th on. The green line is where it is currently accumulation right now, well ahead of average. The red line is where it's likely to hit tasseling, and the black line is where it's likely to hit black layer or maturity. So we've been able to move crop progress a little bit more quickly ahead right now. From a degree day standpoint, though, we have had some moisture issues. Okay, jumping into data from USDA NASS, and these plots are courtesy Brad Rippey from the USDA Office of the Chief Economist. I believe he's on with us today, so thank you, Brad. And these are from last weekend. These were reported on Monday, so they're from the last weekend. Where we are in the way of topsoil, pretty clearly goes along with what we've talked about before. The top number is where we are with topsoil that is short to very short, and then the bottom number is the change from the previous week. So there has been some big improvement in this because seeing decreases in the Missouri again to Michigan area, whereas the northern plains we've seen a little bit of increase, and that's only because we're so dry already. So the worsening up there really is not a whole lot more. 90% of South Dakota is rated at short to very short in the way of topsoil moisture. And then, lots of problems further on out into the Northwest. Moving on to some of our crop conditions. Corn, upper left-hand side, the percent that is good to excellent by state, and the change from the previous week. And then the lower right-hand side, poor to very poor. Indicating, that same northwestern Corn Belt area, South Dakota, only 24% of the corn is rated good to excellent, 40% in North Dakota, 43% in Minnesota. Somewhat better, and especially the eastern Corn Belt overall is pretty good from an overall situation. The importance of this right now, corn is going to be reaching that tasseling, that reproductive phase, over most of the Corn Belt probably within the next couple of weeks. And stress at that time is where you can have the biggest impact on yield. There are other times during the crop phenology that can impact it. The biggest single time is during that pollination period. And that's why we have these huge concerns up in the northern plains, because conditions are not good. They don't look to be improving overall. All right, let's go ahead and jump to soybeans. Same plot for the way of soybeans. Upper left-hand side is good to excellent. Lower right-hand side is poor to very poor. Numbers are quite similar. Soybeans are quite a bit worse in North Dakota than corn was, but similar numbers for some of the other places. Poor to very poor. A quarter to a third of the crop of soybean crop is poor to very poor. Soybeans compared to corn have a bit more time. If they can make it through July and you can get some later season precipitation in August, they can recover to a certain extent. We have done some damage to them, especially in the northern plains already, but they can recover to a certain extent later in the growing season. They don't quite have that same prime time for the most impact on their yield the way corn does. Okay, a couple other crops that are more northern plains focused. And obviously, these show up even worse because the northern plains and then the northwest being areas that are the worst off. Spring wheat conditions and getting closer to the end of their growing cycle. but they're actually overall at their worst point of any year since 2000. Brad did provide the graphic on the bottom of these are all the years, and the scale is during the growing season. So I've labeled the different years that are somewhat comparable. Here's 2021 on the left-hand side. The other years they could be compared to 2017, 2006, and 2002, but we're quite a bit ahead, quite a bit worse off than those were, and sooner worsening, if that's a combination of phrase we can put together, than those other years were. Barley, similar situation, same growing area as spring wheat. Very few, good to excellent numbers are in the 20s, teens in North Dakota, and 20s and regions, and large numbers, large percentage of the barley conditions are poor to very poor. So that leads to a similar graphic to what we showed for spring wheat, with barley some of the worst that we've seen in the last 20-ish years. Pasture and range conditions, no surprise, same kind of thing. We've Central Plains to Eastern Corn Belt, not too bad. Seen some improvement over in the Eastern Corn Belt with the recent rains. Very little of the Northern Plains to Northwest that is good to excellent, and most of it is poor to very poor overall. So just kind of to rehash and diffuse what we were talking about here, that area of the southern and eastern corn belt, say, from Central Plains to Missouri and over to Ohio, Michigan, probably has the better chance overall right now. They've had some recent rainfall. They have some soil moisture, so that periods of dryness they can work their way through, and the outlooks do indicate better chances for them to get precipitation and to not be as hot. As you get north and west of there, parts of Nebraska, Iowa, Wisconsin, and areas north and west, you remember had better chances of being warmer and better chances of being drier. And those areas that are dry soils to begin with can't handle much of a long period of time of dryness and warmth before we start seeing even more crop situations. And that looks to be the case. Like Doug said, exactly where that boundary is going to be, we can't quite say right now. We know the general area, but we're talking, could southeast Iowa be in it? Could northwest Iowa be in it? There's a lot of land involved there. So it's going to be somewhere in that boundary area that we'll see this transition, but overall has its concern. Northern Plains obviously has its most concern. Central Plains, there are some hints of potentially development going on. So that wraps up my part of it. Again, where my contact information is, and we can go to the last of the questions here.
Well, not surprisingly, there are quite a few questions and comments. I'll try to go through them as quickly as we can. We have a little time here. So first of all, this will be archived. Hopefully you all can see where I put in on the chat a couple different locations at the Midwestern Regional Climate Center and the High Plains Regional Climate Center, where they'll be located, both the presentation and the recording. So let's see. Okay, you got the new things. Yeah, Darren Claybo from South Dakota, the fire expert up there, is really saying that the state's going to see high to very high wildfire potential through the month of July at least. And the Predictive Services, the fire folks did put out their outlooks, and Matt Bunkers has made sure that we have an URL for that. Any wind trends that we should be aware of? And golly, that's a tough one. I would say, if nothing else, less, since we're sort of, I know the winds around here haven't been very strong lately, but I've heard from various folks, and it depends on where you are, right? So I haven't heard a lot about wind lately. Dennis, anything on winds? I know they've kind of calmed down from the spring, but anything you want to say?
I think I would agree with Doug that the pattern being where it is, we're probably, it's during transitions between systems that you get windier. Seems less likely to have much wind, but other than the general pattern, no, I don't think too much we can say about that.
Okay. Is the weather that is being experienced normal for a neutral weather condition? Neutral being, I think, referring to the neutral ENSO. And I'm not sure there is a normal for neutral. That's what I will say about that. Dennis?
Yeah, you're right in that when we have a La Nina or an El Nino, if you think about, kind of that bell curve or a distribution of possible events, we know during those we can kind of shift what we expect in that distribution to one side or the other. During neutral conditions, that's why we start looking for anything else we can go to, because there's a wider range of possible issues. La Ninas don't cause all droughts. There are droughts that occur without La Ninas. So there's really not a normal that is occurring with neutral events.
I'm going to stick my foot in my mouth here. I just got an email from our friends at the Army Corps of Engineers and Missouri River Water Management Division, and it's an update, and this is what they do on July 1st for their navigation support. And I just wanted to let folks know because it fits perfectly into this general discussion that we're having today. Basically, it says this, that there will be a reduced flow. Navigation flow support beginning today for the second half of the navigation flow support season. Those of you in the navigation world know what that means. We continue to, quote, we continue to monitor conditions throughout the basin and make adjustments as necessary. We will provide a full update on key stakeholders in the media on our regular July 8th call. That's per the July 1st storage system check and outline, the Missouri River main stem reservoir master water control manual. The service level to support navigation will be reduced 1,500 cubic feet per second from full service levels. I don't think I need to go into great detail about why that is. The inflows up, in the upper basin have been minimal, and there are several websites to go to. I guess if you want to look at that in apps, I'll try to put those in the chat box here in just a second. Anyway, just wanted to bring that into the conversation. And now back to the questions. Can you comment, Dennis, this is for you, or Brad Rippey, if we want to put you on live. Can you comment on conditions for drought and fire risk for California, thinking about fruit and vegetable production and prices? It's a little out of our area. Brad, if you want to do that, maybe raise your hand. If not, don't. Or Dennis, you can do it.
California is a little outside of the scope of our coverage area, so I don't think it's too great, but I'm not going to speculate any more than that because I haven't reviewed their situation out there. Okay,
Brad, you're self-muted. If you did want to say something, you'll have to unmute, and then I can unmute you about that. Okay, on we go. So I think it's easy enough to say that conditions are going to be rough in California too, based on the forecast that we showed today. That center of heat, that center of dryness looks a little bit displaced to their east, but not much. So it wouldn't surprise me if the dry conditions continued. Which teleconnections are influencing the hot-dry pattern? That's a good one. Well, here's what I will say about that. The hot, dry pattern for the Northwest and West is what do I want to say? It's self-reinforcing and somewhat typical for this time of year, but it came a little earlier than normal. I would put it that way. Usually you get some heat and all that stuff, and then you get the monsoonal moisture from the south into the South Four Corners area a little late, starting about now, actually. And there are some indications that's going to happen. We hope that does happen in terms of bringing moisture, at least to the southwest. Sometimes a little monsoonal moisture will spur a lot of thunderstorms, however, and those thunderstorms can obviously have what we call dry lightning, which sets fires off and all that other business. So It's kind of a two-edged sword there. There is a Bermuda high, which has been funneling plenty of moisture up to the center of the country and then turning it straight east and not making it very far to the north, maybe up to Nebraska and Iowa, that area, and then kind of shuffling it off. So we call that the Bermuda high. Plenty of Gulf moisture from Texas up to eastern Kansas, Missouri, but we've seen the repercussions of that. On the slide that precipitation prediction, what does EC mean? Yeah, so EC means equal chances of above, below, and near normal. So it's almost a 33, 33, and 33% chance for each. In other words, there's not a strong indication it's going to be one way or the other, dry or wet, or for that matter, hot or cold, or cooler than normal. Can you speak of relative accuracy of WC forecasts on the 1 to 7 day range? Yeah, it's a good one. Yeah, so what I will generally say about forecasts, I've already said it once, is that precipitation forecasts in the summertime are extremely difficult to pinpoint. Aerial, unless it's a hurricane blasting into the, into the on land or something like that, then you have a pretty good indication where it's going to rain like heck. But we have convective. This time of year is very convective, so you'll get a thunderstorm popping in one place and popping in another, and 5 inches in one place and 0 not too far away. That makes it really hard on forecasters to pinpoint where it's going to be, especially for 7 days. And so basically that's a model, putting a lot of that information out there in terms of what the quantitative precipitation forecast is, or that accumulated precipitation for the next 7 days. It's not worthless, but it's also not perfect. So, if there's a bullseye over your backyard, it could be within 50 miles of that place too. We're looking at 7 days after all. If you want more accuracy, I would go to your local forecast office and look at their 24 to 48 hour forecast in terms of precipitation. Those tend to be a little bit better.
A short modification of what Doug said. The aerial coverage of those is generally pretty good. Areas that are supposed to get heavier versus lesser precipitation. Amounts, I think people are expecting perfect amounts of precipitation out of a 7 day forecast in the summer. It's not going to happen. Not anytime in the near future.
Compare this drought with the Northern Plains drought of 2017 and the 2012 flash drought. You want to start with that one, Dennis, since I've been talking so much?
Yeah, okay. 2017 was focused more on the Northern Plains, and was a little bit later onset, I believe, than this one was. This one we had a lot of, we were dry coming in, and we knew that we were preset for conditions coming in, and that has come about. 2017 was a little bit later onset. 2012 was also a later onset. The early season situation indicators 2012 was not compared. People who we talked with regionally, this one doesn't compare to 2012 early. 2012 was a quick onset, like July or June, July kind of thing. This one set on earlier. So there were some comparisons to 88 tossed around as to early onset in 88.
Yeah, and also by now in 2012, the signs across the entire Midwest were there, and we just don't see them this time. There's still enough wetness and moisture and such. And if I remember 2012 correctly, the air was there was no Gulf of Mexico connection, no moisture coming up at all. We had dew points in the 40s and 50s in Missouri in July, which is unheard of. 2017, yeah, Northern Plains. And this is more of a 2012 in the West, if you will, or Northwest. That's what I would say. It's been a lingering thing up there. How much of the NOAA Star Veg Health satellite image is also related to the existing percent of vegetation per area? as much of a snapshot of vegetation stress?
And that's an interesting question. I don't know much about the product. I should have researched the product a little bit more. I just grabbed it and did a quick background. Carolyn, you ask a really good question.
Yeah. Please describe the. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah.
Oh,
no.
Yep, yeah, Ben. Yeah. Please describe the corn and soybean impacts in Minnesota, North Dakota, South Dakota. Which region has been most impacted? Is there a chance of recovery for corn or soybeans? That's a great question.
Okay, I kind of touched on this near the end of my presentation. South Dakota is probably the worst for corn right now. North Dakota, Minnesota, and parts of Iowa are a little bit better, but still have been, we've had several weeks now of corn rolling, which is not a good thing overall. Soybeans are similar in that same area. North Dakota is about as bad as South Dakota is in the soybean. But again, corn is our first immediate concern because we're coming up on tasseling within the next couple weeks. So we have our biggest concern about loss there. We know we've lost some yield in soybeans already because of the stress that we have seen, but there still is time if we could get some late season moisture. But that's the big if. Can we get that late season moisture in August? And right now it doesn't look optimistic. But again, like Doug has talked about, summertime precipitation too far out in advance is still a bit hard to say too much about.
What crop development models say numerically about likely crop yields if average weather outcome you have in projections comes true, i.e. a baseline yield projection? What crop development models say? What are they saying, I guess? Yeah,
and I don't have access to any of those and don't run any of those. So I'm generalizing that we've lost, probably a few percent of both of those yields. We'll know more about corn in a couple weeks.
Is there any mapping of irrigated areas across the North Central region? And it's mapping. I don't know if there's there may be, Dennis. Do you know?
I believe there is, but I don't know off the top of my head. Brad Rippey, if you're still with us, can you chime in on that, either with a question or comment?
All right. Well, I'm trying to unmute you, Brad. Is self-muted and is muted, but I'm trying to unmute you, though. Yeah. Anyway, you might have to write into the comment area. Some studies show drought coming out of La Nina. Okay. Okay, so it's something we should probably touch on really quickly. Yes, there is. Eros Data Center, I believe Mark Sabota says, in terms of where to go to maybe look at that. EROS Data Center. Couldn't get, and we'll get back to you on the irrigation question. Okay, Brad's going to come back on that as well. Okay, the other thing I wanted to say about go ahead.
Yeah, quickly. There's a USDA funded project that deals with irrigation that I'm trying to remember what it's called. That may have mapped irrigation areas in the plains area. I'll see if I can find that real quickly.
Okay, while you guys are looking that up, some studies show drought coming out of La Nina, according to Matt, and I think that sounds familiar to me as well. And the thing is, we may be going back into La Nina this fall, still up for discussion. The Climate Prediction Center has not put out an advisory on that yet, so we can't say it's going to happen. There are some indications that we may slip back into La Nina. It would not be unprecedented to have 2 years of La Nina in a row. Will the warm Gulf of Alaska water have an impact on coming weather possibilities? Yes, that's a question that sort of came up in terms of how much the Pacific warm water is influencing this, that, or the other thing, and generally the thought is that it's not having a big impact right now. Gulf of Alaska water impact on coming weather possibilities. I don't. It's not my specialty to comment on that. I haven't heard anything on that in particular. It is crazy dry in California, and yep. And what will be the impact on fish and wildlife? Again, warmer water for fish that like cold water is a bad thing, right? We've seen fish kills, but we've seen them for there's a variety of reasons that happens, and across the Midwest and in northern plains. If there is somebody who wants to comment on that, please do. Other wildlife. Yeah, well, it helps some and it hurts others. I will say that there is some indication that invasive species and such aren't used to either the heat or the dryness. It'll knock them back a little bit. That sometimes happens. That's the only silver or positive you can say about severe drought and heat. Worse in the Pacific Northwest. Yep. Is there any year that 2021 mimics in terms of these patterns and impact on agriculture in Iowa and the Midwest states? Dennis, would you know that? Is this like any other year that you remember?
That's where I mentioned 88. There were some numbers when we did the webinar in the middle of the month. Several state climatologists mentioned comparison years. Early season were 88 and 1933. 33 was in the middle of the Dust Bowl, and 88 was a very bad drought year. I'm always careful about sharing comparison years, because when we can do the comparison years, there's an automatic thought to 88, bad drought year, it's going to be drought the rest of the way in. And it will be for some places, I think, this year, but not necessarily for everyone. So the same result in 88 may not be the same result as we see this summer.
Are some states having problems with their public and municipal water supplies? And I believe, trying to think about that, I'm guessing yes, but I'm not sure I have that kind of information.
And this is outside my USDA area, but I don't think there's anything that is dire at this, but there are a number of places where they have shallower aquifers that dry out more quickly, that are very aware of the current situation and watching for changes.
Okay. And Matt Bunkers with the Weather Service is saying the Pacific SSTs are at least marginally favorable for a hot summer, based on another article, some research done by NOAA. What is the precipitation prognosis for the next 2 weeks for the northern half of Iowa and the state of South Dakota? I would say not great. Definitely heating up. It may be relatively cool today, but as we saw that the hazard maps are going to be, the hazard maps show that whole area is going to be under the gun in terms of heat and likely dryness as well. Now, sometimes we have these things called ridge riders, and that's sort of internal language, but there are occasions where we'll get major storms sort of firing or going off in the high plains and then sort of moving around what we have, this ridge. And there is a possibility of those kind of convective systems coming down and covering large areas. We can cross our fingers and hope for those, but predicting those a week or two out is nearly impossible. So I won't go out on a limb and say that. I'd say not good is the prognosis at the moment. And I think that pretty much winds us up here. Greg is sharing, Greg Gust, another Weather Service guy, is sharing groundwater watch information. I'm not sure what that shows.
I assume that's in response to the question about shallower aquifer water levels for various areas.
Okay.
Yes. But yeah, you need to know what your city is using or what your water source is using for their aquifer levels. And hopefully they are working in advance and notifying you of potential problems and any conservation measures that need to be enacted.
Okay, and that wraps up the Q&A and comment section. And we very much appreciate all of you for being on and adding your 2 cents and everything else. Let's all hope it gets better for everyone. And we will check in with you again on July 15th at 1 p.m. Central Daylight Time. Like I said, Pete Boulay is going to be the speaker. He's going to have a full plate. So anyway, everybody have a safe and happy 4th of July, and we will talk to you later. And thank you.